The purpose of this video is to give you a quick introduction to Complexit. As you've seen already looking at the website, there is a downloadable version and a web version. The downloadable version comes off of GitHub and can be downloaded or cloned and brought to your desktop. There are specific instructions as well about installation requirements and how to go about setting that up, which we'll talk about in another video. In addition, there's the online version, which is what I want to talk about quickly here. As you can see, there are a series of tabs down the left side which basically identify each of the types of analytic procedures or computational modeling procedures that Complexit can do. The first and most important is the actual uploading and importing of your data. In this case, it's a database on a multiple deprivation index, the Welsh multiple deprivation index, and here we've got a few variables just for example, income and employment and so forth. Nice thing about Complexit is you can look at the data and then you can see the cases, each case and its profile. You can also, if for further analyses want to subset the data, you can by turning on or off various variables. Given that it's a case-based perspective, the first thing that Complexit wants to do is cluster things to get your cases into the most similar profiles. Again, this can be theoretically driven or exploratory. You'll notice also in each step of the process, at the top are a set of instructions. It's very important to pay attention to them, especially the first time running through. We try to keep things simple, but nonetheless, you can see that they provide the key things you need to know, including access to further, more in-depth tutorials and reading. In this case here, we're doing a cluster analysis, 5 clusters. We run the analyses and we get a nice profile output and then these silhouettes. Again, there's a tutorial just on this process of clustering. In addition, we run the self-organizing map, which is a form of artificial intelligence, neural net. For most analyses, to just follow the standard setups is probably best, but this provides a way of corroborating the cluster analysis based on basically unsupervised learning, machine learning. The next step, and probably the most important, and we have found the most successful in terms of working with people not familiar with these techniques, is the visual intuition that's involved in the analyses once run. In addition to being able to say, for example, look at the box plots and so forth, the silhouette plots and so forth, here you can compare and visualize results on what's called a SOM grid. Each of these quadrants represents its own cluster. And what's nice is you can actually compare the cluster analysis from the k-means to the cluster analysis that the SOM performs. So here's where the SOM put the cases based on how it saw them best clustering. And then you see the actual cluster analysis k-means. So this is case 3, this is cluster 3 belonging to case 10. Here's cluster 5 belonging to case 20. And obviously you'd want to look for some degree of similarity between what the k-means arrived at and what the SOM did. What's also nice is you can look at the bar plots then to actually look at the profile of factors, right? So in this case, these are the factors that are identified, and one can then look specifically at how those profiles went together. So you can see that the cases down here are very different from the cases over here. And again, there's a video that explains that more in detail. The other key thing is what we call a case-based simulation approach. A case-based micro-simulation approach, which allows us to not only just look at the individual cases, as in this over here, but then to look at the actual clusters. So in this case, we ran 5 clusters, and here's how they're distributed on the same grid that you see here. In this case, what we can do then is engage in various types of simulated policy explorations post hoc. So one might want to drive this cluster, cluster 4, closer to others that it looks better like, for example, 1, or that it doesn't look like. That might be the goal of the analysis. So one can engage in various types of interventions. Say we could raise income to a certain level, we could improve employment, we could improve birth weight, and so forth. one can then run the clusters to see, and lo and behold, we did get movement on cluster 4 closer to cluster 1 and cluster 2, which are the profiles of desire. After that's been explored, the other nice thing about this is you can then run a sensitivity analysis on that particular cluster. Basically, this is a Monte Carlo that will run several hundred or several thousand iterations and dithering that within degree, basically like a standard deviation, to get a sense of how accurate is this potential intervention you've made. 80% of the time does it work, or whatever. The other nice thing about Complexit is that you can also do prediction with new or different cases. So in this case, we could bring in the Welsh Deprivation Index at a 2-year interval at a later point in time, and then see where did those communities change, how did they evolve across time, and what neuron match from that SOM grid best explains where that case now is at. And so this is useful not just for exploring new and different cases, but also, for example, in the case of a lot of mental health work or alcoholism and addiction work or policy or environment, looking for at-risk environments or at-risk individuals to see potentially where they're at, or conversely, successful ecosystems or cities or communities or individuals, and what's the potential for others to be similar. The last thing that's really nice about Complexit is that it'll generate a report. As all of these analyses are going on, in the background we're downloading and collecting that information for the user, which can then be downloaded and looked at. Here you see that basically the output is various. We give you the silhouette plots from the cluster analysis, bar plots from the SOM, the actual cluster database, which you can put into other statistical packages, and so forth, and even the SOM output, which you can use for predictive modeling or use in more sophisticated ways in RStudio for other types of analyses. So that gives you a basic feel for what Complexit is, and as I said, the next step is to then watch the individual tutorials for the various tabs to get more detailed information on how they work.